Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Contact Procedures Volume 5 Chapter 1, written by Meat Fecker. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. "This can't be right," muttered Whip. "You could billet a dozen unblooded in here." Or the two of us repeating window and winced slightly. Even the Terran surgeon's best efforts hadn't been able to fully rebuild the shattered bone. The sleek Nectra showed other signs of wear too. Lael was panting heavily after a brief walk from the lift to the new quarters. Her face was gaunt and hollow, and her fur had just yet regained her old luster. Her injury hadn't caused these symptoms, though. Webb's first month of imprisonment would forever remain a hazy blur. He'd withdrawn into himself after the loss of his pack, struggling against a lifetime of indoctrination. It had taken Lael returning to the prisoners of war with a healed shoulder and stories of Terran kindness to coax him out of the self-imposed exile. She'd only been back 3 days before she fell ill. Others soon followed. It hit the injured first. Proud warriors were reduced to small, mere shells, wasting away when they refused food and drink. Groups of sickened Nectra huddled together in corners for days on end, immobile and unspeaking. A few even tried to commit suicide, overwhelmed by the inexorable sense of hopelessness and despair. Only the efforts of the healthy captives kept the sick from perishing. Their pack leader had blamed the disease on the humans and scorned their offers of help, requesting that they leave the prisoners to fend for themselves. The captors had protested, but ultimately bowed to the Nectra's wishes. The healthy prisoners succumbed one by one. Soon only Webb remained mobile. He wasn't sure how he kept creeping blackness at bay. Maybe his newly formed hatred for the Iroquois drove him on. Maybe some part of him refused to fail Lael as she hadn't left him. Either way, he'd endured until the end, when desperation had driven him to ask the Terrans for help. Webb had been swept off by the human scientists' tests, even as the hundreds of medics personnel swarmed into the Nectra's cells. Their wasting disease had become something of a cause to celebrate amongst the human doctors and xenobiologists. Whatever ethical code had been kept by humans from forcing experiments onto the prisoners hadn't kept them from speculating. The leading hypothesis was confirmed within a day. Webb's pack was in withdrawal. The culprit turned out to be the refined version of Schleel's slave drug, capable of forming its powerful physiological dependence without any outward side effects. A human grad student who'd been idly working on the alien adaptation of modern drug rehabilitation programs and started a few weeks later. Webb all but forgot the drug when the humans shared the results of the genetic testing with him. He'd sat speechless while the aging human female highlighted dozens of crudely inserted gene sequences, each doubtless intended to shape his race into something's or someone's idea of a perfect soldier. Neurotransmitters dedicated to relaxation and contentment had been handicapped, while molecules that reinforced pack loyalty had been almost addictive. The degradation of the Nectra and telomere analogues had been quickened, capping their life at just over 30 human years. Regions of the brain required for complex reasoning and abstract mathematics had been starved of proteins as they needed to function, and an entirety of a new module had been grafted onto the brainstem to act as a basic feedback loop. It brought on unease and dissatisfaction in response to prolonged happiness or pleasure. Taken together, the tweaks made the Nectra perfect cannon fodder, fiercely loyal, physiological, incapable of retiring to a civilian life, and too short-lived and handicapped to contemplate rebellion against the Iroquois masters. Webb was so caught up in the workings through the possibilities that he'd missed the human researcher's next words. "Sorry, what?" he said, blinking in surprise. "It's a lot to take in." She laughed. "I said that we can fix it, that we can make you whole again. You game?" After nearly a week of discussion, the Nectra had said yes. Now Webb stood framed in a doorway, soaking in Lael's soft growls of delight as a dizzying array of options sprang to life just above the window's surface. The Terran star, just burning at full beneath the city's towering glass of steel on the horizon, bathed the room in a deep red light. He couldn't help but tense in anticipation of the familiar idle gulp that had once ruled his life. It never came. He wasn't sure how long he just stood there, fixing in the moment in his mind. But an accusing glare from Lael eventually broke through to him. The two Nectra were soon snuggled against each other, talking softly as they watched some of nature documentaries on Earth's many birds. Tomorrow, thought Webb happily, we can face the galaxy. Tomorrow. They didn't leave the room for 3 days. End of chapter. Chapter 2. Webb stepped out of the building and into the sun and the wind. It felt good. His mate hadn't been able to join him on the first excursion, though not for a lack of trying. Lael had made it as far as the lobby before collapsing with exhaustion. Webb had helped her back to the room and then tried to stay, but she'd shooed him away out into making a promise to bring back some sort of, Chinese food. They'd seen the human cooking shows. She'd also threatened to throw him out the window if he came back empty-handed. He was going to make damn sure he found some noodles and stir-fry. He'd been pretty confident that he could manage that when he'd made the promise. Now Webb wasn't so sure. He'd spent his entire life on board one compact station or another, growing accustomed to their rigid and flexible layout as he aged. Everything was neat and ordered and kept carefully in place. The human city was different. For one, the humans everywhere, humans gathering on balconies, humans clattering on the streets, human children chasing each other through the crowds, human musicians filling the air with impossibly beautiful melodies. There were really a lot of them. Some strode ahead purposely, fixed on a private destination of their own. Others drifted casually, stopping to chat and mingle with their neighbors. There were even groups of humans moving in units through the open fields, displaying a frightening level of cohesion in the competitions against other groups. The Nectra didn't feel crowded by their numbers, though. Instead, the city felt alive. Clearly hidden mirrors brought light into the many parks and walkways that filled the broad gaps between the skyscrapers. Fountains and flowers lent an air of light, delicate feel, and the groves of trees and the paths of majesty of their own. Carefully placed sculptures and stages finished the scene with just a dash of art and culture. Taken together, it was beautiful, isn't it? Webb started. He hadn't noticed a human male walk up alongside him. The man held out a hand and Webb shook it. He'd picked up that much from the recent television binge. Seeing the Nectra's confusion at his approach, the human spoke. "I'm Al. Local militia CO wants me to make sure that you don't get lost. And to keep me out of trouble. Nah, we've already got people on that. Trust me. You want to remain blissfully unaware of people." Webb glanced up at the thousands of balconies and windows above him. His last encounter with human snipers was still fresh in his mind. "No," thought the Nectra, shuddering, "I probably don't. Anyway," continued Al, "I'd figured I'd kick things off by finding you something to eat. You got the standard food compatibility treatment when they ripped out the slave mods on yours, right?" The Nectra nodded. Human doctors had assured him that synthesizing the genetic code for enzymes that could break down Terran food was trivial, and both him and Lael had jumped at the chance. Nothing these bipeds cooked could possibly be worse than pack rations. Al smiled wildly. "Perfect! Let's go claim the gruel and I'll cook you a steak." The pre-made stuff was stocked new rooms, which is crap. They headed down into one of the parks and steered towards a small building tucked between the two towering oaks. A small outdoor kitchen unfolded out from one of the walls at Al's approach. Webb was soon salivating as the human guide seasoned 2 massive slabs of meat. "Don't we have to pay someone for this?" "Not for food. We stopped letting people go hungry after the Unification War. Money's just for luxury goods or building shares." Building shares? 3 days in roll and flipped the meat, causing Webb's ears to twitch with anticipation. The meat smelled good. "Everyone makes some kind of investment into their home. My share gives me a room worked for the kickstart of their terraforming process." "What if you can't afford a share? A term or 2 in the Navy or Marines will get you sorted, and you can build up from there. It's how most people get to start. Enlistment isn't exactly mandatory, but it is by far the fastest economic system. Why bother doing anything else then?" "Sorry," I'll look puzzled. "Why don't you just, in a small gruel, get here if nobody's made to do it?" "Why not? It's fun to get out and be toils in the factories and mines. I haven't seen any slaves or servants. We've got machine rigs or a dirt-side fabber. They're some of the most sought-after jobs in civil engineers meet. Making mental note to bring Lael down here when she was recovered. Maybe he could even prepare a meal for her." Al was just packing away the kitchen when Webb finished. Enjoy the food. You've just convinced me to learn to cook. Excellent. Let's get going. I still have a lot of ground to cover by nightfall. Any special requests? Lael's going to tear me in half if I don't bring her back some Chinese food. Couple foodies in my squad. I'll drop them a line and make sure some of them waiting for you when you get back. Now, let's go to get you into what reminded him of one of the passenger cars in the Galacti. No, on board Lotus Station. Terrans called it the Lotus Station. He was a little surprised at how few stares he drew from the other human riders. But when he asked Al about it, his guide only laughed. We were warned you'd be coming out days ago. Seems the brass underestimated just how long you guys could binge on television. The car slid to a halt as they departed. Welcome to the University of British Columbia, our most prestigious local institution. And as a scientist, Webb couldn't see how the human could balance the endless patrols and drills he'd been trained with the academic career. How do you manage both? Al laughed again. It's not very difficult. Most of us are pretty involved outside of the military, actually. I hesitated briefly before following. Webb felt a little stunned. They'd arrived late, but still caught most of the professor's summary of the Nectar's genetic tampering and modifications. The addition to their brain had been lessened, their skewed neurotransmitters had been rebalanced, and their accelerated aging had been brought back to normal levels. Better than normal, actually. The best human estimates were that they'd managed triple if Nectar's natural lifespan, and a handful of laboratories had formed working groups to look at repairing the existing telomere and Al's tour plans by dragging him to half a dozen lectures on xenobiology, physics, mathematics, and literature before the harried-looking human finally managed to hop his charge. Easy there, buddy. You can always come back tomorrow. There's still one place that I want to show you before we get you back to your mate. But we need to do it now. Tide's coming in. Al led him back into the tunnels and then out again. Webb let out a strangled gasp as he stepped out of the tunnel and onto the beach. He walked out onto the sands and slipped out of his footwear, luxuriating in the feel of the warm sand on his furred feet. He crouched down in the water's edge and watched a small crab bury itself in the sand, the tiny creature oblivious to his presence. Then he made his way over to a small tidal pool and reverently lifted out a starfish, gently running a finger over the textured surface. He was bringing Lael here tomorrow, even if he had to carry her. She was going to love this. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel or the author, all the stuff is down below. And as always, I hope that you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next story. Cheers.